The question came from the smallest child in the front row, and it stopped 120 people where they sat. Why do you stand so still? I have taught for 26 years, and I have learned that the questions which matter are never the ones you plan for. We had planned everything else. We had practiced the order of the morning, the songs, the candle, the 2 minutes when the bell would fall silent and the whole school would hold its breath together. I had rehearsed my own small part until the words felt smooth and harmless in my mouth. What I had not planned for, what no rehearsal could have given me, was a boy of 7 leaning out from the end of the bench, his hand half raised, asking the one thing every adult in that hall had been too careful to ask. The man he asked was standing at the side of the stage in the full dress of the King's Guard. I should tell you how he came to be there, because even now it seems improbable that he was. Our school sits on the edge of a quiet market town in a kingdom I will not name beyond saying it is mine, and it is old, and we are not the kind of place that great occasions visit. Once a year, on the morning of remembrance, we gather the whole school into the hall, and we keep the silence, and we read the names from the small brass plaque by the door, the names of those from this town who went away in uniform and did not come home. It is a modest ceremony. For most of my years here it was attended by a handful of gray-haired men from the Veterans Hall, by a few parents, by whichever of the older pupils could be trusted not to fidget. This year was different, and the difference had a name, and the name was Tomas Brevin. Tomas had been a pupil of mine, long ago, a serious boy who sat where the smallest child now sat and who did not fidget at all. He had gone into the Guard the way some boys go to the sea, as if it were the only direction the tide ran. And this spring, by some turning of fortune I still do not fully understand, his regiment had granted that a single guardsman might attend the remembrance ceremony at his old school, in full dress, to stand the vigil for the town's fallen. I had written the letter half certain it would be ignored. The answer came on heavy paper, and it said yes, and it gave a date, and it gave the man's rank and nothing more. So on the morning of remembrance, a car I did not recognize came up the lane, and out of it stepped a man I would not have known. He was tall in the way that discipline makes a man tall, holding height as if it were a duty rather than a fact. The red of his tunic was so deep it looked black in the cloudlight. The brass of his buttons caught what little sun there was, and above his face rose the tall dark column of the bearskin, so that he seemed to me, absurdly, like something carved and then somehow persuaded to walk. White gloves, a row of medals I could not read. A bearing that asked nothing of the room and gave the room no permission to ask anything of it. He came up the path between the puddles without once looking down at them, and at the door he stopped, and he did not offer his hand, and he did not smile, and I understood at once that whatever this morning was going to be, it was not going to be ordinary. "You are the head teacher," he said. It was not a question. I am to stand at the side until the silence, and then to keep the vigil at the plaque. I will need to know the order of the morning. I gave it to him. He listened the way I have seen surgeons listen, taking only what he needed and discarding the rest, and when I had finished, he gave a single nod, as if a contract had been signed, and asked where he should stand. I want you to understand the children before I tell you what happened, because the children are the whole of it. They came into the hall the way they always do, in a long shuffling river of small bodies, and the river broke on the rock of him and divided around it. They had never seen anything like him. Some of the little ones actually stopped walking and had to be moved along by the hands of the teacher behind. They stared. Of course they stared. He stood at the side of the stage with his rifle grounded, and his eyes fixed on a point above all our heads, utterly motionless, and to a child a grown man who does not move is the most extraordinary creature in the world. I saw them whispering. I saw a girl of 9 dare another to wave at him and the other refuse. I saw a boy raise a hand slowly in the air in front of his own face, testing some private theory about whether the still man could see. The still man saw everything. I would learn that later. At the time I only knew that he gave no sign of seeing anything at all. The little ones, I should say, had built an entire mythology around him before the morning had even properly begun. I caught the edges of it as I moved among the benches, settling them. One small voice was certain he was not a real man at all, but a clever machine the king sent to schools. Another, with the grave authority children grant to their own inventions, explained that guards like him were not allowed to blink, and that this one had not blinked since before any of us were born. A third theory, whispered with delicious horror, held that if you made him laugh he would have to give up his sword and go home in disgrace, and that this was why he never smiled, because the whole kingdom was depending on him not to. I have taught small children long enough to know that they were not being silly. They were doing the serious work that children do, which is to take a thing too large to understand and build a story around it small enough to hold. They had never been told what the stillness was for. So they had made up reasons, the way we all make up reasons for the things no one explains to us, and not one of their reasons had anything to do with the dead, because no one had ever thought to tell them that the dead were what the stillness was about. That, in the end, is what made Pieter's question the question it was. He had not made up a reason. He had simply, in the directness of the very young, decided to ask the man himself, and the man, alone of all of us, was willing to tell him the truth. We began. We sang the first song, the small one about the harvest that we always sing, and the children's voices went up thin and true into the rafters, and I felt, as I always feel, the particular ache of that sound. I read a short passage. The candle was lit by two of the eldest pupils, who carried it to the front with the elaborate care of children entrusted with fire. And all the while the guardsman stood at the side and did not move, and I watched the children's eyes keep sliding back to him, away from the candle, away from me, back to the impossible still figure in red. Then came the moment I had built the whole morning around. I asked the school to stand for the silence. 120 children rose with a great rustle and scrape, and then the rustle died, and we stood in the held breath of it, and the old bell in the tower above us began to toll the hour that would mark the start of the 2 minutes. 1, 2. The strokes fell into the quiet and were swallowed. It was on the third stroke that the smallest child in the front row, a boy named Pieter who had only joined us that autumn and who did not yet know all the rules of how a hall is supposed to behave, leaned out from the end of his bench, lifted his hand into the silence, and said, in a voice that was not loud but that carried into every corner of that stone room, because there was nothing else in the room to compete with it, "Why do you stand so still?" I felt my whole body go cold. There is a particular horror that lives in the chest of every teacher, and it is the horror of the unscripted child in the sacred moment. I have spent my life teaching children that there are times to speak and times to be silent, and I had spent the whole of that week teaching them that this, of all mornings, was a time for silence. And now in the very heart of it, one of my own had spoken, and not to a friend, not in a whisper, but out loud, to the KingsGuard, in front of the whole school and the parents at the back and the gray veterans in their row, on the morning of remembrance. I started to move. I was already half out of my seat, already shaping the gentle, urgent shush that would fold the boy back into silence and let us repair the moment and carry on as if nothing had broken. But the guardsman moved first. It was the smallest movement. He turned his head, that was all. After standing for the better part of an hour as though he had been built into the wall, he turned his head slowly, and he looked down from his point above our heads to the boy at the end of the front bench, and the turning of that one man's head pulled every eye in the hall with it, as if we were all tied to him by invisible thread. I froze where I was, half out of my chair. Some instinct older than my training told me not to break this, whatever this was about to be. The bell told its fourth stroke and stopped. The 2 minutes had not yet begun. The silence we kept now was a different silence, an unplanned one, and into it the guardsman looked at the boy and the boy looked back at him without the smallest fear, the way only the very young can look at the very imposing, and for a moment that seemed to me to last a long time, neither of them moved or spoke. Then the guardsman lowered himself. He did it with such control that it did not look like bending at all. It looked like a building deciding, with great deliberation, to come down to the height of a child. He brought the heel of his rifle to rest, and he went down on one knee on the stone floor of my school hall, the deep red of his tunic pooling around him, the bearskin tipping forward as his head came down, until his face was level with the face of a 7-year-old boy named Pieter, who had broken the most important silence of the year, and did not yet know that he had done anything wrong. I heard a sound behind me that I will never forget. It was the sound of 120 children, and a row of veterans, and a clutch of parents, all drawing breath at exactly the same instant. "You asked me a question," the guardsman said. His voice was quiet, but it was pitched in some trained way to fill the room without seeming to rise, so that the parents at the very back later swore they had heard every word. "It is a good question. I will answer it, and then we will keep the silence together. Is that fair?" The boy nodded. He had gone very solemn now, the way children do when they realize late that the adult has taken them seriously. "You asked me why I stand so still." The guardsman let the words rest a moment. "Will you let me tell you a little of why before I tell you all of why?" Another nod. "When I was a boy," he said, "not much older than you, I lived in this town. I sat in a hall like this one. There was a man I knew, an old soldier, who used to stand very straight at the front of our remembrance every year, and I asked him once the very thing you have just asked me. I asked him why he stood so still. Do you know what he told me?" The whole hall was leaning toward him now. I could feel it, the physical lean of a crowd that has forgotten itself. The boy shook his head. "He told me that stillness is how a soldier carries the ones he cannot carry any other way." He let that settle. I did not understand it yet. Neither did the boy. But I saw the boy's brow draw down in the effort of understanding, and I saw the guardsman wait for him, patient as stone, and I understood that he was not going to leave the child behind in the dark of a sentence too big for him. "I will show you what he meant," the guardsman said. "But first I must tell you who I am standing for. Will you look at the wall by the door?" Every head in the hall, mine among them, turned to the small brass plaque beside the great oak door, the plaque I had walked past 10,000 times, the plaque with the names of the towns fallen, that on every ordinary day of the year was so familiar it had become almost invisible. "There are names on that wall," the guardsman said, still on his knee, still speaking only to the boy and somehow to all of us. "I am going to read you one of them, and then you will understand why a man stands still." He rose. He rose the way he had knelt, without strain, as if rising were simply the reverse of a thing he had practiced 10,000 times, and he took up his rifle, and he walked the length of the hall to the door, his boots ringing slow and even on the stone, and the children's heads turned to follow him the whole way like sunflowers turning to the sun. I had never heard the hall so quiet. The unplanned silence had become deeper than any silence I had planned. He stopped before the plaque. He stood at attention before it for a moment, and then he removed one white glove, finger by finger, and folded it into his palm, and laid his bare hand flat against the cold brass as a man lays his hand on the shoulder of a friend. "This wall holds the names of men and women from this town who put on a uniform and did not come home," he said, and now he had turned so that he spoke to the whole school, and yet his voice had not changed. It was the same level, carrying quiet he had used to the boy, as though every child in the room were the boy. "Most of you walk past this wall every day. You hang your coats near it. You do not read it. There is no shame in that. A name on a wall is a hard thing to read, because a name on a wall does not look like a person. It looks like a word." He moved his hand along the brass until it rested under one of the names. I could not see which from where I sat. "Here is one of them," he said. "He was 22 years old. I am going to tell you 3 things about him, and they are all true, and not one of them is written on this wall, because no wall is large enough to hold them." The hall did not breathe. The first thing, he said. When he was your age, and his eyes found the boy in the front row again, he could not sit still. His teachers despaired of him. He drummed on the desk. He looked out of the window. He was, by every account I have, the worst behaved boy this school has ever had the misfortune to enroll. A ripple went through the children, the smallest beginning of laughter, quickly swallowed. But the guardsman did not seem to mind it, and a thing happened at the corner of his mouth that on another man I would have called a smile. The second thing. He grew up and he grew tall and he joined a regiment, and on a cold morning a long way from this town, when the men around him were afraid, he did not run. He stood. He stood between his friends and the thing that frightened them, and because he stood, 11 men who were also frightened are alive today and have children, and some of those children may one day sit in a hall like this one. He paused, and his hand pressed a little against the brass. He had given them the first thing and the second thing, and he let the room hold the weight of them before he gave them the last. I should tell you what was happening in the children's faces while he spoke, because it was the strangest thing I have witnessed in a classroom in 26 years, and I have witnessed a great deal. There is a kind of attention that children give that no teacher can command and no curriculum can manufacture. It does not come from authority. It comes only when a child senses, with the unerring instinct they have and we lose, that the adult in front of them is telling the truth, the whole truth, with nothing held back and nothing arranged for effect. I have spent my career trying to summon that attention by every honest trick I know, and on my best days I borrow it for a minute or two. The guardsman had the whole of it, from 120 children, and he was not trying. He was simply saying true things in a true voice, and the children leaned into him the way a plant leans into light, because the truth was the light, and they had been starved of it without knowing. A girl near the middle of the hall had begun, very quietly, to cry, not from fright but from something larger that she did not yet have the words for, and the boy beside her, without being told, had taken her hand. I watched a pair of brothers I knew to be incapable of sitting through a single assembly without a scuffle sit as still as the guardsman himself, their mouths slightly open. I watched the eldest pupils, the 14-year-olds who have spent 2 years perfecting the art of being unimpressed by everything, forget entirely to be unimpressed, and I understood, watching them, that the guardsman was not breaking the solemnity of the morning at all, which had been my first terror when the boy spoke. He was building it. He was building it more truly than my candle and my passage and my careful order of service had ever built it, because he had found the one door into a child's reverence that all our ceremony walks straight past, and the door was simply this: tell them about a real person, not a sacrifice, not the fallen, not a wall of words, a boy who could not sit still, who grew up, who stood on a cold morning, who did not come home. He went on. And the third thing, he said, and for the first time his voice did something, not a break, nothing so loud as a break, but a kind of deepening, the way the sea deepens past the shelf. The third thing is that he did not come home. He stood, and the 11 lived, and he did not come home, and his mother kept his coat on its hook by the door of their house for 19 years, and could not bring herself to give it away. I heard again behind me a soft sound from the row where the old veteran sat. I did not turn. I did not need to. Now, the guardsman said, gentling again, coming back down to the boy. You ask me why I stand so still. Here is the whole of the answer. When I stand at my post, I am not a statue, though I know I look like one to you, and I am sorry if I frightened you. I am a man holding still on purpose. I hold still because there are men and women I cannot bring back, and standing still, perfectly still, for as long as it is asked of me, is the last thing I am able to do for them. It is how I carry them. When I want to move, when my back hurts and the rain runs into my collar and 1,000 people pass me and laugh and take their pictures and try to make me flinch, I think of the ones who stood when standing cost them everything, and I think, they did not move. The least I can do is not move either. He looked down at the boy. That is why I stand so still, he said. Does that answer your question? And the boy, This small boy named Pieter, who had broken my careful silence and given the morning the only thing it had ever truly needed, looked up at the towering man in red, and in a voice gone very small and very serious said, "Yes, thank you." I do not know how to describe what that did to the room. I have tried in the weeks since to find the words, and I have failed every time, because the thing that happened was the absence of a thing. No one clapped. No one wept aloud, though I saw cheeks that were not dry. The hall simply filled, all at once and to the brim, with a weight that I can only call reverence, a weight I had been trying and failing to summon by ceremony for 26 years, and that this man had brought into the room in the space of 3 minutes by kneeling down and telling the truth to a child. "And now," the guardsman said, straightening, his glove still folded in his hand, "we will keep the silence, not because it is the rule does not matter. We will keep it for him and for all the names on this wall and for everyone in this hall who has someone of their own to be silent for. I will keep the vigil. You have only to be still with me. Can you do that?" 120 heads nodded as one. He turned to face the plaque. He drew the glove back on, finger by finger. He brought his heels together with a sound like a single quiet word, raised his rifle to the carry, and went into a stillness so complete that he seemed once again to have stopped being a man and started being a monument, except that now we knew. Now every child in that hall knew what the stillness was made of. They had been shown the man inside the statue, and so the statue had become unbearable to look at, in the way that a true thing is unbearable, and one by one they stopped trying to look at it and bowed their own small heads instead. I have kept that silence in that hall 26 times. I have never kept it as we kept it that morning. There was no shuffling. There was no cough that some child tried to hold and could not. There was only 120 children and a row of old men and a clutch of parents and one guardsman, all of us standing in the same held breath, and the long shafts of cloudlight coming down through the high windows onto the worn stone, and the dust turning slowly in the light, and the brass plaque shining at the door, and the great red figure motionless before it with his head bowed at last over a name. I must tell you about one of the children in particular, because of where she was sitting and what the silence meant for her, and because I did not know it until afterward. 3 rows back from the front, on the aisle, sat a girl of 8 named Liesel. Her father had gone away in uniform that very winter to serve far from us, and he had not yet come home, and was not in danger that any of us knew of, but was simply gone in the way that fathers in uniform are gone, present every night in the empty chair at the table and the unanswered question of when. I had not thought, when I planned the morning, what a remembrance assembly might be for a child whose own father wore the uniform of the men we were remembering. I am ashamed of that now. I should have thought of it. I think of everything else. I learned later from her mother that Liesel had been dreading the morning for a week. She had not been able to say why. But she had understood, in the way children understand things they cannot put into words, that this was a morning about uniforms and about not coming home, and that her own father wore a uniform and had not come home, and she had tied the two together into a knot of fear she carried into the hall and could not untie. And then a man in the deepest uniform she had ever seen had knelt on the floor and explained, to a boy younger than herself, in words she could follow, that standing still was how a soldier carries the ones he loves, and that the men on the wall had not been lost so much as they were being held. I watched her during the silence and did not understand what I was seeing. I saw her shoulders, which had been up around her ears all morning, come down. I saw her face, which had been pinched and white, go quiet and grave and almost peaceful. Her mother told me afterward that Liesel came home from school that day and went straight to the photograph of her father on the mantel, the one in his uniform, and stood in front of it for a long time, and then turned to her mother and said, "He is being held. Even when he is far away, someone is holding him still." And her mother, who had spent the whole winter unable to find a single true thing to say to her daughter about the empty chair, found that she had nothing to add, because a soldier in a school hall had already said it. That is what the mourning did, and it did it without any of us seeing it happen, in the place where the real work of remembrance is always done, which is not in the hall at all, but in the small rooms of children's hearts where they are deciding, without telling anyone, what the world is and what they will be in it. When the bell tolled again to end the 2 minutes, no one moved for several seconds after the last stroke had died, as if we were each reluctant to be the one who let the ordinary world back in. I rose to bring the mourning to its close. I had a small speech prepared, the same one I give every year, and I opened my mouth to give it, and then I looked at the faces of the children, and I looked at the guardsman standing his vigil at the wall, and I folded my speech back up inside myself unspoken, because I understood that anything I added now would only be noise laid over music. So I said the only thing that was true. I said, "Thank you," to the guardsman, the same 2 words the boy had said, and I sat down. But the mourning was not finished, and the thing that finished it was the one thing I had not foreseen, the thing that turned a moving ceremony into the mourning this whole town now measures its remembrances against. One of the old veterans stood up. He was the eldest of them, a man of perhaps 90, who came every year and sat in the same chair and said nothing and went home, a man so much a fixture of the morning that I am ashamed to say I had stopped truly seeing him, the way one stops seeing the plaque on the wall. He stood with great difficulty, both hands on the chair in front of him, and he stood very straight once he was up, straighter than his years should have allowed, and the whole hall turned to him. He did not speak to us, he spoke to the guardsman. "You read the name under your hand," the old man said in a voice like dry leaves, "but you did not say it aloud. I think you did not say it because you did not want to seem to make this mourning about one man, and that is a courtesy, and I honor you for it." He paused to gather his breath, and no one in that hall would have dared to fill the pause for him. But I knew the boy you described, the boy who could not sit still, the boy who stood on the cold morning so that 11 men could go home. His old hand rose and touched his own chest. I was one of the 11. I felt the whole hall move, a vast soundless shifting, as 120 children turned to look at a living man who had been saved by a name on the wall. "I have come to this room every year for 60 years, the old man said, "to sit with his name, and in 60 years no one has ever told his story to the children. I had begun to think no one ever would, and that when I died the story would die, and the name on the wall would go back to being only a word." He looked at the guardsman, and then he looked slowly around the whole hall at all the small upturned faces. Today a child asked a question, and a soldier knelt down to answer it, and now 120 children know that my friend could not sit still and grew up to be the bravest man I ever knew. "You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever." His voice did not break either. These old men do not break, but he had to stop and press his lips together and begin again. "He has been carried by one man's stillness for a long time. Today you have taught a room full of children to carry him too. I am 90 years old, and I did not think anything could still surprise me, and you have." The guardsman had turned from the wall when the old man began to speak. He stood now facing him down the length of the hall, and I watched something pass across his face, the first true feeling I had seen there all morning, something that was not in his training and that his training could not hide. He brought his rifle to the present. Then slowly, he raised his white-gloved hand and held a salute, not to the old man, or not only to the old man, but past him and through him to the wall and the name and the cold morning 60 years gone. And he held it, and held it, and the old veteran took his trembling hand from the chair back and brought it up in answer, and the 2 of them stood saluting each other across a hall full of children, the youngest soldier of his line and the oldest, with 3 generations and a brass plaque, and a single still name standing in the air between them. I have seen many things in 26 years in that hall. I have never seen anything like that, and I expect I never will again. When the salutes came down, the old man sat very carefully, and the hall let out its breath, and I understood that the mourning was over, that there was nothing more that could or should be added, and I rose and dismissed the school in a voice I barely trusted to hold. The children filed out the way they had come in, but they did not come in the same children. I watched them pass the plaque on their way to the door. Every year I have watched them stream past it without a glance. That morning, one by one, without any teacher telling them to, the children slowed as they reached the wall. Some of them touched it. A girl of 6 stood on her toes to reach the brass and then ran to catch up with her line. The smallest boy, Pieter, stopped in front of it for a long moment, reading the names he was only just learning to read, his lips moving, and then he looked up and found the guardsman who had returned to his stillness at the side of the door, and the boy lifted his hand, not to wave this time, but in the small, unpracticed salute of a child who has decided, that morning, what he is going to be. The guardsman did not break his stillness. But I saw his eyes come down, just for an instant, to the boy, and I saw them soften and then go forward again. It was enough. The boy had seen it too. He went out into the gray morning lighter than he had come in. I stood for a while in the emptied hall after the last of them had gone, in the way you do when a room has held something it does not usually hold, and you are reluctant to be the one who lets the ordinary back in. The candle still burned at the front. The cloud light still fell in its long shafts, and I found myself doing a thing I had not done in years, which was to walk to the plaque and read it, all of it, every name slowly, the way the children had read it on their way out. I had stopped reading it long ago. I had let it become furniture. I had let it become, exactly as the guardsman said, a wall of words, and I, the head teacher, the keeper of the morning, the one who was supposed to teach the children to remember, had been the one who had most thoroughly forgotten how. There were names on that wall I had walked past every working day for 26 years, and could not have told you a single thing about, not the color of a single life, not whether the man had been tall or short, married or alone, brave by nature or brave only on the one morning that asked it of him. I knew them as letters cut in brass. The guardsman had stood in my hall for an hour and shown me, without once meaning to instruct me, that I had been failing at the one thing I most believed I was doing. I am not ashamed to say I stood there a long time. I must tell you the last of it, because it is the part I have carried with me most. When the hall had emptied, I went to thank the guardsman properly, and to offer him tea before his long drive, which he refused with great courtesy. We stood a moment by the plaque, and I, who had spent the morning marveling at a stranger, looked at him for the first time as a man and not a monument, and something in the line of his jaw, in the seriousness of him, in the way he held his height as a duty, reached back through 26 years and found a boy I had once taught. "Tomas," I said, "Tomas Brevin." He looked at me, and the monument was entirely gone now, and there was only a man who had been a boy in my classroom. "You taught me to read in this room," he said. I sat there. He nodded at the third bench from the front on the left by the window, and I knew, without checking any register, that he was exactly right. "You used to tell me to sit still. I never could." The corner of his mouth moved. "I have made rather a career of it since." I asked him then the question I had to ask. I asked him whether the boy he had described, the boy who could not sit still and grew up to stand on the cold morning, was real, or whether he had built him out of all the names on all the walls to give the children something they could hold. He was quiet for a moment. Then he laid his bare hand on the brass one last time, under the name he had chosen, and he turned the plaque a little toward me so that the cloud light fell across it, and I read the name beneath his fingers. It was Brevin. It was his own name, an older one, the same and not the same. "He was my grandfather's brother," Tomas said. "He died 19 years before I was born. My grandmother kept his coat on the hook until she died. No one in my family ever spoke of him because it hurt too much to speak of him, and so for a long time he was only a word to me too, a word on this wall I walked past as a boy and did not read." He drew his hand back. "When I was old enough to understand what the word had cost, I decided that I would not let him be only a word. That is why I joined. That is why I stand. And that is why, when I had the chance to come back to this room, I came. He looked at me steadily. A name is a word until someone tells the story. After that, it is a person again, for as long as anyone remembers the story. I told it to your children so that he would be a person for another 60 years. That is the whole of what a soldier on a quiet wall can do. We cannot bring them home. We can only refuse to let them become words. Then he settled the bearskin and took up his rifle, and thanked me for the morning the way a man thanks you for a gift, and walked out down the path between the puddles without once looking down at them, and got into the car I did not recognize, and was gone. That was in the spring. It is autumn now, and I am writing this on the night before our remembrance morning comes round again. Tomas cannot come this year. His duties hold him at his post, where he stands his stillness for a great many names, ours among them now. But the old veteran will be here. We have spoken on the telephone 3 times since the spring, he and he has agreed to do a thing he has never done in 60 years of coming to that hall. He is going to stand up, on purpose this time, in front of the school, and he is going to read one name from the wall, and tell the children 3 true things about the man it belonged to. The same 3 things, in the same order, so that the morning Tomas gave us does not become a word either. There have been changes in the school since the spring, small ones, the kind that do not announce themselves. The coats no longer hang on the hooks beside the plaque. The children moved them of their own accord to the other wall, and when I asked why, a boy told me with great seriousness that you should not hang a wet coat next to a soldier. No one had taught him that. He had decided it. The plaque itself I have had cleaned, and the brass brought up bright, not because it was neglected, but because the children kept stopping to read it, and I wanted them to be able to. And on the morning after the assembly I found, propped against the wall beneath the names, a single drawing in wax crayon, unsigned, of a tall red figure kneeling down to a small one, and I have not had the heart to take it away, and so it is still there, and I think it will stay there as long as I am the one who decides such things. I have thought, too, about the courage it took for that man to kneel. We speak a great deal in this niche of standing, of the discipline of standing, and rightly so, for it is a hard and a beautiful thing. But I have come to believe that the harder thing, the thing that asked more of him than any hour of stillness, was the kneeling. A man trained for years to be a wall was asked, by a child, in the most public and sacred moment of a morning he had been sent to dignify, to stop being a wall and become a man in front of everyone with no warning and no script, and to do it gently, and to do it true. He could have stood. The rule was on his side if he had stood. Most men would have stood. He knelt instead, and the kneeling is the whole of why I am writing this down, because it taught me something about my own work that I am still learning. There is a stillness that honors the dead, and there is a moment, rare and unmistakable, when honoring the dead requires you to move toward the living. The discipline is in knowing which the moment is asking for. He knew. He had the harder discipline, the one that lets a man hold still through every insult and every indignity for the sake of the fallen, and then break that very stillness perfectly for the sake of a child who only wanted to understand. I have thought a great deal these past months about what happened in my hall and about why it has stayed with all of us the way it has. I think it is this. We are very careful, the grown-ups, on our days of remembrance. We are careful and we are quiet and we are correct, and in our care we sometimes wrap the thing we are honoring so thickly in ceremony that the children cannot see what is inside, and so they grow up keeping a silence they have never understood, for a wall of words that were never made people for them. It took a child to ask the plain question that all our care had taught us never to ask, and it took a soldier with the discipline to stand utterly still for an hour, and the deeper discipline to kneel down for one boy to answer it. I will keep the silence again tomorrow. 120 children will keep it with me. And somewhere far from here, at a post I will never see, a man I taught to read will be standing his own silence in the rain, perfectly still, carrying the ones he cannot carry any other way. I know now exactly why he stands so still. So do 120 children. And that, I have come to believe, is the only kind of remembering that ever truly lasts. Not the silence we keep, but the reason we are finally able to tell.